to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Hope everybody's staying safe out there. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the New York Giants secondary. You know, I get asked this question a lot, and there's not a lot of news right now. Obviously, there's no mini camps, there's no training camp. The draft's been over for a month. But I get asked this question all the time. What is the most important piece of this defense for this defense to be successful this year? And my answer to that, almost more often than not, is going to be the secondary. Now, of course, we have to generate a pass rush. But if you look at the way that the New York Giants have constructed this football team since Dave Gettleman has really been here, has been drafting defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen, whether it's drafting them or, trading for them. Bringing a guy like Leonard Williams or drafting, Dexter Lawrence early. They drafted B.J. Hill relatively early. That's been their mantra, building up that, defensive line, getting some guys up the middle to stuff to run. But they've definitely, spent a lot of resources on that secondary, whether it was the comp pick, the supplemental pick, rather, for Sam Beal, where they graded him out to be a first rounder. They spent a third-round pick on him, whether it was trading up for DeAndre Baker in the first. This year, take a look at what they did. Take a look at what they've done the last two drafts. This year, their first two defensive picks were coverage picks, right? Where they drafted Xavier McKinney, who was the first safety off the board, and they drafted Darnay Holmes, who really was probably the first nickel corner off the board, and if he wasn't, he was the second. So they were the first to really draft at those positions. And last year, DeAndre Baker, they traded up for, and he was the first cornerback off the board in the 2019 draft. Not to mention, the guy they spent the most money on in free agency was a cornerback, James Bradberry. Oh, yeah, and in case you forgot, they traded for Jabrill Peppers when they traded Odell Beckham to help themselves in that secondary. There has not been a position on this roster that they've spent more attention to and put more resources into than that struggling secondary for the New York Giants. And I didn't even get into guys like Julian Love and Corey Ballentine, who they also spent some late-round draft picks on over the last two drafts. Not to mention they drafted another cornerback in the 7th round this year. So it is certainly something that the New York Giants have spent a lot of draft picks on, a lot of money on, whether it's free agency or the draft. The question is it the right decision? Well, one thing I will say, it is a common trend now in the NFL. It's a new trend where teams have really started to spend a lot of their resources in that secondary and not nearly as much as they used to on the pass rush. You take a look at the New England Patriots, the team that Joe Judge is coming from, and I'm going to get into some of the teams who had the highest coverage grades last year. They had the best defense in football last year. If you look at the stats, I think they gave up the fewest yards and the fewest points. And they've had one of the top 5-10 defenses in the sport since I can remember. Last year, Jamie Collins led the team in sacks with 7. But the reason that they generated the 5th or 6th most sacks in the league was because of how strong they were in coverage. That is an area where the New England Patriots have spent free agency money, where they've spent draft capital. And guess what? That's where Joe Judge is coming from. That's where Patrick Graham is coming from. And they're going to take the same philosophy. Even a team like the Baltimore Ravens, who I think ranked 9th in coverage, I didn't pull them up when I pulled up the teams, has spent a lot of capital in the secondary. Teams are starting to adopt this more and more often. What is the reason, you ask? Well, the reason, in my opinion, is because teams get the ball out a lot faster than they used to. So it's not as easy to get after the quarterback when you don't have strong coverage. I said I did a video on this a couple of months ago where quarterbacks are starting to target the slot and the tight end more and more often. Why? Because they're quicker passing routes. They don't have the time to throw the football that they used to. And, I think you saw the New England Patriots make a lot of adjustments after they saw the way that the New York Giants were able to beat them in the Super Bowl. Now, by no means am I discounting the pass rusher, and it's definitely, in my opinion, the New York Giants' biggest need. But if the New York Giants are going to win football games this year, especially on the defensive end, the one unit that will need to surpass expectations and really take a step up will be the secondary. Last year, if you take a look at the New York Giants secondary, they had Janoris Jenkins, who's no longer on the team. They replaced him with James Bradberry. They had Peppers, who missed some time due to injury. They bring in Xavier McKinney, who hopefully has a big step up for the New York Giants. And they have a completely new scheme, something that should fit DeAndre Baker's skill set if he is back with this football team, which I think most of us at this point probably think he will be. Of course, you have more experience with guys like Julian Love, and guys like Corey Ballantyne and Sam Beal, for example, who can't stay on the football field. But this secondary last year, or not just secondary, just coverage in general, was horrible. Whether it was the linebackers guarding the tight ends, they ranked 30th in the league, and I'm going to pull up the numbers in a second. That needs to shoot way up, because with the lack of pass rushers that this team has, if we can't cover, we're not going to be able to get after the quarterback. But let's jump into some of the teams from last year by PFF standings in terms of coverage grades and just really show you how important it is to be able to cover in today's game. The New England Patriots ranked first in the league, and the surprise, not to the surprise of many, they had the number one defense in all of football. The Patriots earned a team coverage grade of 92.7 throughout the regular season, the highest grade of among all NFL football teams. And then they go on to say some of the names of the players: Stephon Gilmore, Jason McCourty, Jonathan Jones, so on and so forth. The next team we're going to pull up, the San Francisco 49ers, and this one surprised me a little bit. Now, of course, they brought in Dee Ford, they drafted Nick Bosa, which definitely is going to help the coverage grade, having a better pass rusher. But Richard Sherman surprisingly had a very strong year last year for the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners went to the Super Bowl. Well, they ranked second in overall coverage. A team that did not surprise me, who I knew spent a lot on the cornerback position in recent drafts, was the Buffalo Bills. Sean McDermott has led the Buffalo Bills to 3 consecutive elite team coverage grades. Last year, they ranked 4th in the league. And one thing, when you look at that Bills defense, who many feel are the best defense in the sport, they didn't have an elite pass rusher. That's why they went out there this year and they spent some money bringing in, I can't remember who they brought in, but they brought in, Mario Addison, the guy I wanted for the New York Giants. They don't really have an elite pass rusher, but where they generate their pressure and their defense is in coverage. And when you look at some of the numbers there, what they were able to accomplish: the 5th fewest EPA per passing attempt in the league, 2nd fewest touchdown passes through 16 games. And everybody, of course, knows Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, some of the best guys, in the NFL at their positions. And then finally, the Pittsburgh Steelers were another team. They went out there and they added Minkah Fitzpatrick. Minkah Fitzpatrick was a very good acquisition for them, and because of that, they ranked 5th in the league in coverage. And they're another team really without Watt is definitely, and Dupree are good pass rushers, but Watt is very good in coverage as well. And that's something that I worry about the New York Giants at the linebacker position in terms of dropping back in coverage. Where did the Giants rank? The Giants ranked 30th in the league. Now, some of that definitely has to do with the fact that they had players that were inexperienced, playing at positions that weren't ready to play there yet. A guy like Corey Ballantyne, who graded at 29.8. Deandre Baker, who was playing in a defense that he wasn't comfortable with, graded out at a 45.6. But we remember time and time and time again that the New York Giants would get burnt on the 3rd and 12s, the 2nd and 10s, so on and so forth. Jabrill Peppers, who was supposed to be kind of the captain of that secondary outside of Janoris Jenkins, didn't play a whole season. This year, I think that this secondary has the talent to be much improved. There's no denying that. But they still lack experience. And the question to me is going to be whether or not this unit could play up to the talent level on this football team. Can DeAndre Baker, if he's back, take that next big step forward? Xavier McKinney will be huge for this football team, but it's not just in the secondary. It's also going to be at the linebacker position. Can a guy, like Ryan Conley, if he gets the opportunity to play, grade out decent in coverage? Because that will be the difference between winning and losing football games. I think a lot of people right now are worrying about the pass rush, and they should. We have a lot of underdeveloped pass rushers, guys that right now, O'Shane Zimenez, his career high, I think, is 4.5 sacks. The same could be said for Lorenzo Carter. Kyler Fackrell had one year where I think he had 10 sacks. But outside of that, they don't have much production in terms of getting after the quarterback historically. So it is definitely a reasonable thing to worry about if you're a New York Giants fan, how we're going to get sacks on the quarterback. But the only way, with the lack of, high tier pass rushers that we're going to be able to get after the quarterback, is if we grade out strong in coverage. And what the New York Giants have done over the last 2 years since Dave Gettleman has been here, now the last 3 years in these drafts, is try to bring in guys that are strong in coverage. Now, they still lack in that department, in my opinion, at the linebacker position, but they should be much improved. And if they're not, well, then you have to start to question what the New York Giants are doing. They've kind of not really spent a lot of attention at the pass rusher position. They've drafted Lorenzo Carter in the 3rd round, O'Shane Ximines in the back end of the 3rd round. They haven't spent any supreme picks on the pass rusher position, and the same can be said in free agency. They had the ability to perhaps put some of those resources into an edge rusher this year in free agency. Instead, they went out there and they brought in James Bradberry, who I thought was a necessary addition with all the young players we have out in that secondary. But this secondary, I think, could very well take a huge step up this year. And if they could get to league average, this defense could be a lot better than people think. And it is by far the most important unit, at least in my opinion, to this year's defense. Because if the Giants are going to surprise people, this defense is going to have to play a lot better than last year. You can make an argument that last year the New York Giants had the worst defense in all of football. And the biggest reason for that was the lack of coverage, both in the intermediate and deep routes at the corner, safety, and linebacker positions. They're going to have to get a lot better. And the amount of resources that they have spent, we better hope that they do. And maybe they'll surprise some teams with the talent they've brought in. I think McKinney is the wild card here. McKinney's a guy that you could kind of line up all over the football field. The same can be said for Peppers, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think you're going to have a lot of formations where you have 6 DBs out on the field at once, and the Giants are going to have to find a way to cover some of these tight ends and running backs. But that will be the key, not just to the defense, but I think to the team this year in the win-loss department. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.